for 20 minutes. And during this time, it's my goal to be able to talk through the cycle of regulation, but give you guys some tools that you could use to talk through it with your staff and help people see the background behind the cycle of regulation. Because one of the things we know is that understanding really comes before helping when we're supporting kids in crisis. That is also one of the key takeaways from my group, which was, and hearing you guys talk in general, which is that you really have to know individual students in order to really understand what their cycle of regulation looks like. We're going to be thinking about Kendra today as a student that we're going to use to talk through the cycle of regulation. And Kendra's 15. What we often see is what's presented here on the screen. During English, she refuses to participate. She sat in the back of the class with her hood up, doodling. Teacher tries to engage her a lot, and she gets eye rolls, heavy sighs. She covers her eyes. Teacher says, you got to engage, Kendra. You got to participate today. And Kendra stands up. She swears at her poor teacher, makes a comment about not wanting to live anymore, and then she storms out of the classroom. Many of us can think about situations like this, and this is oftentimes the only thing that we will see in a classroom or in the counseling center or an admin. This might be what you heard about. You didn't even see the cycle of regulation. And now what you're responding to is the standing up, the swearing, and a student who may be suicidal and is now roaming the halls. And we know that a lot has probably come before this. And actually, Kendra herself shows a lot of things that have happened ahead of time. She just began high school. She used to enjoy school. She's generally thought of as kind and friendly and thoughtful. But this year, she's really struggling. Her grandmother was like a mom to her. She passed away last year. She's lost 15 pounds. She has stomach aches, headaches. She's exhausted. She wants to be taken out of her harder courses. And earlier today, her teacher has noticed that she's spending not much time with friends. She's by herself. She's journaling. She's ignoring the group. She's drawing. She's snapped at a bunch of her friends. And other kids are leaving her alone. She's eaten lunch by herself. And then she's been pretty moody. And then all of this stuff happened that is the thing that's more apparent during that English class. And we know, based on our prompt today, that understanding all of this stuff comes before helping a kid. Understanding the cycle of a kid's regulation comes before helping. But when we are presented with just the picture of a kid being dysregulated and storming through the hallways and maybe being suicidal, then we miss a lot of the opportunities for intervention, both that already occurred, but also opportunities for intervention that may occur again in the future. So one of the tools that I'm going to give you guys today is a sheet that's going to track through what we're talking about today, that will help you coach other people on how do we understand our kids before we help them. And then I'm going to talk you guys through the cycle of regulation like I would when I'm talking to a school team. And so the first form I'm sticking in, I'm trying to stick in the chat. Hold on. I'm full screen, and so I'm limited in what I'm allowed to do. The first resource I'm sending you guys, oh, too many windows open, is, why can't I attach a file? Okay, I'm having trouble attaching a file. I'm usually able to do it. Allison, since you're the host, you might need to assign me more hosting capabilities. If not, I'm going to have to send these out via email, and I'm really sorry. But one of the resources that I'm going to send you guys, if I can't do this over the Zoom, is going to be a handout on helping school teams understand the cycle of regulation. And this handout looks like this. And in this, we're going to walk through the different signs that a kid might be getting dysregulated. But I also have a worksheet that you can use when you're talking through specific students and moving through a cycle of regulation. So what does this specific kid look like when they're calm and engaged? With Kendra, We know she is generally kind, generally happy, generally enjoyed by friends and by others. And then we have a section for how do we make a plan for either maintaining the phase that they're in or teaching them skills and how to cope with the phase that they're in. So I will send out this form, and we're going to be walking through this cycle of regulation during our session and our time today. So first off, what do we mean by emotional regulation? This is really not suppression of feelings and emotions. It's skillful understanding and balancing of things like frustration or anger or irritability. We're not going to ask Kendra to be not upset about losing her grandmother, or not frustrated with schoolwork, or not irritated with her teacher for saying you got to engage. What we are going to do is ask her to learn skills to respond in healthier ways, so that when she's experienced sadness or frustration or irritability, she's able to respond without threatening self-harm. We know that many of our kids really, really struggle with this, and they get really dysregulated. And this cycle of emotional dysregulation is specific to every individual, but generally follows this pattern of kids being calm and engaged, maybe experiencing a trigger either at school or at home, and then getting really agitated. And then that can accelerate up to a crisis phase, and then gradually kids de-escalate. Oftentimes we do see kids who show a peak phase that lasts a long time. And oftentimes what's happening there is that the peak phase may start to de-escalate, but then we prompt them to get back to work too quickly, and it re-escalates. And then they re-escalate even more, and it can go up and up and up and up. This cycle of regulation can look different for individual kids. Sometimes it looks like this. Sometimes it looks like this. Sometimes they look kind of like this. So this is not prescriptive, but each individual kid generally shows signs of this cycle of regulation. Now, our adult curve is always calm and cool and collected, right? Except it's not. Oftentimes our own cycle follows kids' cycle as well. And sometimes we also get dysregulated in response to a kid's dysregulation. So paying attention to the adult curve is also really important. All right, how do I clear my screen? Clear all drawings. Okay, great. All right, so the action happens when kids are calm and engaged. This is where relationships are built so that we can understand what can help them de-escalate, so that we can understand what their triggers are, so we can understand what skills they need for functioning. And when they're calm, they're compliant, they're cooperative, they're engaged, they're responsive to praise. Not every kid enters schools calm, and you guys know that. But our goal is when we see them calm, we want to maintain the calm phase. And if we don't see them calm, we want to find out, where are they calm? Is it on the soccer field? Is it when they're with their mom? Is it when they're with their best friend? Are they calm in science class and that's it? It's because we want to be able to maintain the calm phase or promote more opportunity to be calm, because that's where kids can actually develop relationships. It's where we can think about what structure do we need to put in place to make it more likely for them to be calm. It's the only place kids learn behavioral expectations and learn new ways of responding, because when they're in other phases of the cycle of regulation, they're really reacting, not really as able to learn new skills. It's also where we can provide positive attention for positive behaviors and explicitly identify and label them so that they can do more of these things. And again, if calm is only happening on the soccer field, what is it that helps them be calm there? Is it the physical activity? Are they pro-social there because they've got a lot of friends on the team? How do we provide them with more opportunity to be calm in environments that aren't necessarily their favorite? Many kids, though, come into school triggered. There's lots of things that can be really triggering. And we talked about this during our warm-up today. And things that I think I really took away from our discussion is that social challenges, especially in middle and high school, are so prevalent for our kids. Social media brings social relationships from home into school. You can get text messages in the middle of ELA or in the middle of social studies or science that bring your entire world kind of crashing down around you. And that didn't used to be the case. But our kids are bombarded by social challenges in school that used to just be out of school. We also know that a lot of times our kids who have difficult home lives really struggle with breaks or being out of their routine. And that's a real struggle point this week. And knowing which kids struggle more can help you anticipate what those triggers might be and provide a bridge for them. There's a lot of triggers outside of school that can be brought into school, whether it's family conflict, hunger, relationship stress, financial hardship. I often hear from school teams that we don't know what triggers this kid. They just go from 0 to 60. It's not always predictable. And one of the things that I often note is that sometimes when that's happening, either an outside trigger has been brought to their awareness, or internal triggers can often happen. And that may be a kid thinking about a negative social interaction. It might be thinking about or predicting about something bad happening in the future. We see this a lot of kids with anxiety who are actually doing pretty well, but then they start to worry about something that's happening later in the day. And they start to kind of lose it earlier in the day because they're worrying so much. So these internal triggers can also happen and be part of the trigger phase. When we see kids triggered, anticipating and documenting potential triggers is so important because that helps us make student-specific accommodations to prevent escalation. It also helps us start to prepare for those kids and recognizing early signs of stress and help students refocus their attention away. It also is an opportunity for staff to redirect to that student, or if needed, the entire class activity, especially if you know that that kid can go from trigger to crisis mode like that. Knowing those triggers and redirecting a kid is super critical. And when I'm coaching teams on how to identify triggers using that sheet that I showed you, I'm often thinking about what are this kid's triggers that you might see in your individual classroom or individual situation, and what are some things that we can do to redirect that student or that class if we see that trigger. We want to notice and acknowledge it, provide calmness and attention. If the kid benefits from proximity or eye contact, that's great. Sometimes kids need time and space. That's okay too. This is where you want to be really individualized in your response. But again, distraction and refocusing on different things can often be the most effective way to deal with the trigger phase, because what we're trying to do is acknowledge that it happened and then redirect our attention somewhere else so we're not mulling on the triggers. When kids are really agitated, a kid is having trouble engaging. Their legs may be tapping, their pencils may be twirling, their head might be down. And we saw that with Kendra in our exemplar when she had her head down, her hood was up. She's really having a hard time engaging. And she's showing a lot of what we call junk behavior, this agitated body language. And junk behavior is a term that that refers to this minor unwanted behavior that's annoying, but it's not dangerous, it's not harmful, it's not illegal. We see this a lot in our teens. It's whining, it's pouting, it's arguing. It might look like just obnoxious behavior. And this is really different from hitting or kicking or suicidal comments or dangerous behavior. That needs a different approach. But when we're thinking about junk behavior, it's not all that helpful to focus on the behavior itself. What we want to do is just pivot and praise, minimize the attention we're giving to that behavior. Instead, look for ways to reinforce the positive things that they're doing. Try to remain calm and be consistent. These behaviors can be super annoying, but we can't be super irritated at them, at least outwardly. Because our irritation can often make junk behavior explode into really problematic behavior. This is a handout that I will also send you that I was going to stick in the chat around understanding junk behavior that can be helpful when you're talking to your teaching team about what do I ignore and what don't I ignore. And it's not just that you're ignoring, you are being calm and consistent, and you're pivoting and praising and trying to focus on what the kid is doing right. We see a lot of this when kids are agitated. We're also redirecting and shifting tasks or validating their emotional experience as well if the kid is really annoyed. Validation is one of those things that we often forget when we're trying to support kids. This is another handout that I'll send. I actually will send you this, this validation sheet on the right. And I've been known to print these out and laminate them because validation is so important when we're helping kids who are chronically irritable or chronically anxious, which many of our kids with big mental health challenges are. And what we do is we have 3 steps. First, a kid says, I hate this. I don't want to do this today. Forget you. Start with a question that's just curious. Well, what makes you not want to do this today? And then rephrase or state exactly what they've said in their own words. Like, you aren't having any fun here. You hate this class. This class just isn't very much fun for you. You'd rather be anywhere else but here. You want to acknowledge the emotion that they have that's behind this. That sounds frustrating. It sounds like you're feeling bad about this. It sounds like you are just feeling over this. Or so you feel confused about what you're doing right now. So acknowledge the emotion that they're presenting with. If you have it wrong, they will tell you. And then you acknowledge the emotion that they're telling you that they have. And then you communicate some acceptance of something, anything. You do not have to accept their junk behavior. What you can do is you can accept their emotion. I can see why you'd feel frustrated. I can see why you'd feel annoyed by that happening. A lot of people might feel that way. And that can be upsetting when you're feeling that way. After you validate, then you can direct the youth to ask differently. And you can say, okay, I know you're feeling that way and your papers need to be on their desk. I never use the word but. You're feeling that way, but your papers need to be on the desk, because kids who are highly sensitive, especially are really dysregulated kids, who often benefit from like DBT type approaches, they hear the but as invalidation. So I'll say all this, and your papers need to be on the desk. All this is true, and you still need to be with us, and we still want you to join us. You can follow with a warning or minor negative consequences, like I need your papers on the desk, or you're not going to be able to participate in the activity today. Or you're not going to be able to earn your reward. But if you have a kid who escalates into crisis, and you know that this is going to escalate them further, don't do it. don't promote those negative consequences in that moment in time. Choose your battles, because our #1 job is to keep them from getting dysregulated. Validation is the first step is so important because, especially with our really sensitive kids, it communicates acceptance of the feeling, not the action. And it's the only thing for highly sensitive kids that can allow kids to hear the need for the behavior change. They have to know that you understand them before they're able to accept that they need to do something differently. I also say this constantly, validating their point of view is not the same as agreeing with them. You're just letting them know that you heard them and that you hear their perspective. And also they can and should do a little bit differently. Problem is that doesn't always work, and kids can accelerate and they get provocative or argumentative. Their behaviors become more overt and disruptive. And oftentimes, unfortunately, this is the first time any of us notice. And with Kendra, the most overt behavior was when she was accelerating and saying, forget this, I'm over this. And we often don't see the trigger, we don't see the agitation, we don't intervene earlier. Instead, we have a kid who's accelerating. Some kids accelerate vertically almost. And if we catch them in acceleration, oftentimes we've kind of lost the battle already. What we can do if we see a kid accelerating is we can acknowledge their feelings, try to validate. We can offer one strategy to help deal with the problem. Like, you can try this in a different way, or let's take a break. Identify what they can do to cool off. Give them time and space to respond. I often spell out pause, P-A-U-S-E, to give them time to do that. And then I give them reinforcement immediately after they start to respond, like, all right, I look forward to seeing you after you're done. This is a terrible time to offer choices because it's too overwhelming, and consequences can be really overwhelming. We don't want to take bait that things get too personal either. We don't want to get into power struggles. Unfortunately, kids then sometimes move into peak phase, and we know what this looks like. It can look like aggression, destruction, uncontrollable crying. We heard that in our breakout room, that we had a kid who's in a panic and they're crying uncontrollably. The good news is this can be a short phase typically, but it can be refueled by additional triggers or thoughts or actions. So peak phases can go on for a long time. Our number one goal is to reduce the intensity and duration of the crisis. We cannot focus on educating them why they should follow the rules, showing who's in control, or having the last word. What we're really trying to do is be as flexible as possible. And the phrasing that I like to use is no look, no talk, no touch. We don't want to discuss consequences. We want to talk privately with a student. We also really want to pay attention to our environment and be as non-intrusive and non-invasive as possible, and leave an unobstructed exit for the student if needed, because oftentimes if you obstruct the exit, they're going to go after you. Your first priority is to keep other kids safe, and honestly, the students safe and yourself safe, calm, and other students uninvolved. We have to be cool, calm, and composed as much as possible. And it's okay to tag out and say, I cannot be the person who does this right now. I'm too escalated myself, and request support. Our physical interventions really should only be used as a last resort, but frankly, sometimes they're needed in order to keep a kid safe or other people safe. Some language that we can use for this time can be like, I see that you're really upset right now. I can tell you'd prefer to be anywhere else in the world. Or predict positivity. Everything will be fine. We just need to find a way to help you return to a 2 on your stress scale. We also want to offer simple ways for the kid to communicate with you that are easy, and oftentimes don't rely on language, because language can re-escalate, and our goal is to move into de-escalation as soon as possible. And for our de-escalation phase, what we're using typically during this time is strategies to help a kid wear down. Early in this phase, we really don't want to debrief about the situation yet. We really want to provide kids with activities to engage, other students with activities to engage in, and we want to be encouraging and supportive and provide calm. I often will offer top de-escalation tips. This is another laminated card that I will hand out to staff, and these are common sense de-escalation strategies that are used in TCI, but having them handy during a crisis is so helpful. The other tools that I'll use, especially during a recovery phase, to debrief with the youth is a plan, an individual crisis management plan. I'm going to lower my screen again, and this is going to be towards the end of what we're talking about here today. We're going to be working with teams to identify what does each kid look like in each of these phases. And then in our individual crisis management plan, we're going to be developing a standardized plan that is set for the kid, that identifies what are their triggers, what behaviors of concern might they have, do they have any safety concerns, what skills does this kid need teaching, and then what are our interventions for each of these phases that a kid has that we want to implement for this specific child in this specific classroom. And then how do we help a kid learn from this event? This should be a one-pager. It should also have emergency contacts listed on it so that if a kid is really in an emergency crisis situation, you can access it quickly and be able to support kids immediately. Having standard tools and standard language used across your building is so important, because having this common language and common understanding for these individual crisis management situations is one of the most important strategies for helping prevent future crises, but also making sure that everybody's on the same page of responding.